Folks, welcome to another episode of Careers in Coffee. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming Tim Passmore. So Tim is Suffolk's Police and Crime Commissioner. He's going to be talking to us a little bit more about what he gets up to. So let's bring on Tim. Tim,
hello,
welcome.
nice.
How you doing?
Yeah, very well. Nice to see you all.
Fantastic. Now, first question, have you got coffee or tea to Careers in Coffee?
Well, I'm a tea drinker and here it is. And I drink lots of tea.
This is what we like, guests who are prepared and on the ball.
We love tea.
Now, Tim, we were chatting before. You've been Police and Crime Commissioner for 9 years next month. Obviously, You've learned lots, you've done some amazing stuff, but many folks will still, what does a Police and Crime Commissioner do? Who is my Police and Crime Commissioner? Tell us a little bit about the role and what you get up to.
Okay, so first of all, Jordan and everybody, I'm delighted to be here. It's an elected role. So the last elections were back in May, and I'm in my third term, so I'm very honoured and privileged to be in this role. And the Police and Crime Commissioner does have an important role in society. So I'm representing the whole of the force area, which is Suffolk, the whole of the county. And one of the most important jobs you do, you actually hire or fire the chief constable. We don't go in for the firing bit because he is the one who actually leads the day-to-day running of the force. Okay, so the Police and Crime Commissioner has an oversight role or governance. You also set the budget for policing, which in our case in Suffolk this year is just over £150 million. And you'll probably have heard about council tax that people pay on the homes that they live in, and I have to make a decision every year at what level of council tax to charge for the policing part of the council tax, and that is in the parameters that the Home Office and the government allow you. So we've just heard, for example, on the finances that for next year's council tax, if I chose to, you could charge an extra £10 a year for a Band D property. That's the sort of middle range. And at the moment, for a Band D property, for policing in Suffolk, each household will pay on average £216 a year. So those are the two really important bits. But I'm also charged with making sure that we have an efficient and an effective force. Now, that's a very interesting item to discuss. So it's not just about the money, it's about the strategy, the sort of policies. And a lot of that you'll find is contained in what's called the Suffolk Police and Crime Plan. And every time you're elected, you need to bring out a new police and crime plan. And that's actually is out for the consultation at the moment. So anyone can join in and comment up to the 22nd of November. And this looks at all the different strands of policing, what we do for our grants work, commissioning, looking after victims, and how we can try and make sure that Suffolk is kept safe and secure, preventing crime, as I say, looking after victims. And we also do a lot of the grants to help particularly young people and others who perhaps have found it difficult, supporting victims, things like domestic abuse, violence against women and girls, of course, is very, very topical, quite rightly so at the moment, serious sexual offences. And the list is enormous. So the overall role, Jordan, is huge. And it's fascinating because it's got so many different links to it. And a lot of the problems in society won't be solved by policing alone. It's about how do we all join in together, what I call a Team Suffolk or Suffolk PLC approach, young and old. And it's all about making Suffolk an even better place than it is at the moment.
Fantastic. And you mentioned their budget, £150 million. That is a lot of money. What do we get for £150 million in Suffolk? What does that sort of equate to in terms of policing?
Well, so I would say this now. We do have a very, very hard-working and a very good police force. They are under huge pressure because our funding, compared with other counties per person, is the second lowest in the whole country. But what you do get, so for example, by the end of March next year, we'll have 1,330 police officers. The support staff, which are really, really important, who do a lot of the back office work and so on. There's getting on for 900 of those. We have about 50 PCSOs just under at the moment. A lot of volunteers. That's a really important part of what we do. Things like community speed watch, volunteers on horseback, eyes and ears in the community, looking after the museum and so on. And within those volunteers, we also have the special constabulary, which is open to all ages of people. They have the same powers as a police officer. They are volunteers, and we've got about 150 of them at the moment. And then also within the policing family, we've got a very large police volunteer cadet contingent. So it's a little bit like any other uniformed organisation, Scouts, Army, Air Cadets, these sorts of things. And that's a really important part for young people as well. You can get involved in that, I think, from the age of 12 up to 18. There's a lot of leadership courses and so on there. So it's there's a lot. And apart from that, what you do get is the detecting and preventing crime, which of course is fundamental. And there are many, many departments, from roads policing to detectives. We've got an awfully big capability looking at cybercrime, hate crime, online abuse. It's a fascinating role because there's so much there to go on. And I could fill up the whole of the interview telling you what we do. I'm not going to.
That's fantastic. And I think you touched on in terms of, sort of support for young people, how they can get involved. We've just got a question in. So how do you feel young people could be involved in helping to keep Suffolk safe? Are there any groups that support young people to be involved? So I suppose mainly that would probably be cadets, I presume.
Well, there is cadets, but the other thing that I'm very keen to develop, so anybody at any schools, universities, colleges, lockdown obviously got in the way, but we've had some exceptionally good talks to sixth form students, for example, at Coppleston School, two of the big schools over at Bury St Edmunds. We had a group of sixth formers from all over East Anglia a while ago. Regular liaison with the university and further education colleges, West Suffolk and also in Ipswich as well. So if anybody wants to talk or engage, we can do that. And we're really anxious to hear from young people what things they're concerned, because young people are victims of crime, just like, you know, an old boy like me or anyone else for that matter. So we do need to hear from young people. And I'm not just saying this, but I think the younger generation in particular has got a difficult time at the moment, because not only is education being disturbed because of the lockdown, the things about student fees, employment, job opportunities, training. We have got to get over this idea that as people enter the workforce, they've all got to have 5-10 years experience, because by definition, it can't. So I'm very keen on developing apprentices, work experience. We've got a whole range of activities we do. But the engagement with young people, if you've got forums, discussion groups, formal, informal, whatever it is, and you like to come and question us, ask what you like, come up with suggestions, you only have to get in touch and we will come along.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And I want to talk a little bit more around sort of policing roles as well. So what's the pathway to becoming a police officer? But also, obviously, the police, as you've mentioned there, 900 administration staff as part of that. What other roles are available if you're interested in joining the police, but you think actually police officer's not quite for me? So what's the pathway for some of those?
So there's an awful lot of information on the Suffolk Constabulary website for police recruitment and staff recruitment. And the staffing side is very important, because we have to look at things like arranging the money, the finances, the human resources are very important. We've got a big estate. So if you look at all the police stations, which are still there, and it's not that they've all closed, some are not open to the public, but that, you know, there's probably about 30 odd buildings of different sorts, some of which are stations all over the county. We're looking for people to work with us to improve the environmental credentials. I like to call it, as opposed to being too extreme about carbon reduction, I've always had the view that actually, how can we make better use of scarce natural resources? So it includes use of fuel. It also includes about elimination of waste, what we do with water. We live in a very dry part of the country, offsetting with planting schemes, a lot for that. And the communications, of course, as we're doing now, we've got a communications department. There are opportunities there, be it online, the traditional forms, radio, films, all sorts of things like that. There's support at our cybercrime unit. We've got one of the best cybercrime units in the whole country that's based at Halesworth. We run that jointly with our chums over the River Waveney in Norfolk. There's also the support work for victims. I mean, there's some terrible stories about domestic abuse and violence, and the victims need to be looked after. That's a very important part of my role. So the range, Jordan, is enormous. So the best thing to do, if you're interested, is working with young people as another one of the cadets. Look at the Constabulary website, and it will show you all the different departments Mechanics, for example, we've got a big workshop. There are opportunities there to some extent. So yeah, have a look and see what you think.
I think we can include a link below as well, so anybody watching can then just have a click on, take you straight through to the website. And we've got another question. So what led you to the role of Police and Crime Commissioner?
Well, as I say, it's an elected role. So I stood as a Conservative. I am a Conservative. It doesn't mean, by the way, you have to agree with everything any government or any party says. I've always said in my role, it gives an indication of what you might believe in. But for me, it's about putting Suffolk first. And that's important because I'm a Suffolk native. I was born in Felixstowe in 1959. So those of you good at maths can work out that comes up to 62. But it's a real privilege for me to represent the whole of Suffolk. And that's what really made me interested in doing this. I would probably have, I would have liked to have been an MP. I was on the candidates list, but I didn't get selected. But in many ways, this is far more suitable for me because part of my background was I was leader of Mid Suffolk District Council for 8 years before I'm in this role. I'm still just a backbencher. And having that link between local authorities, other parts of the public sector and the police, as well as the private sector, is really, really crucial. So it was an opportunity to do what you can to try and make things better for everybody in Suffolk. And I'm really, really clear it's crucial. And I also was attracted to it because, in my view, having always been interested in economic development, policing is probably, without being too narrow-minded, I think it is the most important public service, because if we're not safe and secure in our home life, our work life, when we're out, leisure activity, sport, whatever it is, young or old, we've got a real problem. And we also know that providing opportunities for good, high-paid jobs, keeping an area free of crime, corruption, violence, these sorts of things, is really, really crucial to getting the economy to expand. So that's why I, despite my perhaps slight bias, this would put it at the top of the tree. It's not decrying any other public services. And having a good police force is absolutely crucial to everybody's well-being. So if you put all that together, I happen to think Suffolk is a brilliant county. It's got so much to offer, largely because of the people. And I absolutely know there's huge untapped potential here, young and old alike. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it definitely does. Before I even get on to the next one, that's a really good question, actually. So will the digital policing strategy increase the number and variety of opportunities within the police force?
Anecdotally, and this is a personal view, I would say yes. And I will tell you why, because if we look, for example, during lockdown, the recorded cases of online offences that we've got has gone up by over a third. And you've got to remember that not every crime is reported. We think on average, according to the Crime Survey of England and Wales, probably 50% of crime is actually recorded. So there's a lot there. And the growth of the online community, particularly during lockdown, has expanded enormously. And whilst it's very, very helpful, well, doing a meeting like this, of course, depends on the technology. Unfortunately, you've got to remember anything new does allow opportunities for criminal activity. And the amount of information and the data storage that has to take place to investigate crimes is growing exponentially. And we have the kit that will download the evidence. For example, there's a lot more happening in the field of paedophilia, child exploitation on the dark web, which I don't even know where it exists apart from it's in there somewhere. But there's some really serious criminal activity going along there. You think of things like domestic slavery. I thought that died out 200-300 years ago. Sadly, it is bigger now than it was 200 years ago. And a lot of it is undercover. Forced labour, illegal immigration. You know, you've seen those terrible pictures of people getting stuck in the channel. So there's a huge amount there, and nearly everything now has got some digital footprint. If you talk to the Constabulary, the people who specialise in this, we're talking about 98% of all crime has got a digital footprint of some sort. If you think about your mobile phone, iPad, laptop, watch, whatever it is, there will be a digital trail. So that explains probably to anybody who asks that, the level of opportunity is enormous. And of course, it's becoming more complicated. And I'm sure people of your generation are so much more expert in dealing with this than somebody like myself. And that's why there's an increase in demand.
That's a fantastic response. Thank you so much. And yeah, what do you think are some of the misconceptions about the police force? I think for most folks, they see it on the TV and you want to be like Luther or the Sweeney or anything like that. Yeah, what do you feel are some of the misconceptions there?
Well, I always say at home, this is a film, it's a show, it's entertainment. Now, there are some very good points in it. They are trying to make some reasonable assertions, excuse me. But you've got to remember, it's a bit like a James Bond film. Not all MI5 and MI6 operators go around with all this swish kit and doing this and so on. But there is a serious message here. Every single police officer I've met in Suffolk is hardworking, really, really dedicated to keep people safe. And they go out of their way, sometimes at great personal risk. And you've got to remember, they're people like you and me. They've got mums, dads, husbands, wives, children, grandchildren, whatever it happens to be. They are actually people like you and me. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten. In any big organisation, there will be one or two misfits, should we say, who perhaps don't comply with what they should do. But as somebody said to me the other day, if you find you get a nurse or a midwife who doesn't behave properly, or a consultant, or some of you may remember the case of Harold Shipman, that doctor who poisoned a lot of people over a period of years. We don't suddenly say all doctors are bad and things like that. So what I would say to people is take it with a pinch of salt when you see this. There are some quite interesting parts. Sadly, corruption occurs in any organisation. All I can say is the police deal with this extremely severely through the Professional Standards Department. And if people are found of misconduct, well, they can be thrown out of the force at a stroke. So I'd like to reassure people, remember that's entertainment. Yes, there are some messages there, but do not think that's what it's like in reality. Take it with a pinch of salt.
Well said. And next question. So what qualities and skills do you think young people need to be successful within the modern police force?
Okay, so there are basic academic qualifications, which are nothing for anybody to be worried about. I mean, when I was there, you had to have your basic O-levels and so on. There's a lot of information about this on the website. Again, comprehensive lists. The starting salary, for example, is just over £24,000. You can join when you're 18, and that can rise after 7 years to 41,000 without promotion. So there's some good prospects. So you get a very good pension. But for the individual, I think you have to be a good communicator. I think you like to meet people, and it's really important, this, of all backgrounds. And I'm not just talking about your cultural or ethnic background. It's rich, poor, whatever it happens to be. You've got to be able to communicate really well with people. Have an empathy and understand some people are very nervous. Some people are potentially scared, unfortunately, the police. So they're not. They're our friends. And you've also got to be prepared to be resilient and determined, because you will, I'm sure, come across some really unpleasant situations, like a horrible accident, domestic violence, stabbings. This doesn't happen every day, but it will happen during your career. So you have to have that sort of resilience, I suppose, to be able to cope with it. I think you've got to have the compassionate side. You've got to care for people who are in a difficult position. You also probably have to be pretty decisive. If you've got a difficult situation, if things are getting out of hand, you can't sit down like we are and have a cup of tea and make a decision. You have to make a snapshot decision. What are we going to do now? And I think you've got to have your self-discipline, because there are sadly people who think it's funny to goad police and are quite offensive. So you've also got to have a degree of toughness about it. So overall, I think it's a great career, but I know that a lot of young people have got all those qualities in abundance. I also think, and you won't find this anywhere officially, I've always been a great believer in talking and communicating with people. If you've got something that's difficult, find someone you can talk to as a reliable friend who can sometimes say things that you might not want to hear, but they're doing it because they're very fond of you and actually care about you. So in my role, I'm just changing the subject slightly. If you feel isolated, alone, you've got to have some other people you can refer to who perhaps aren't directly your own relatives, because you'll get a slightly different view. So if you've got a problem, be prepared to share it with someone else in confidence, and that will help you, because we all have moments when we think, oh gosh, what the heck have I done here? Or I made a right horlicks of that, or that was a right cock up. So I think being able to do that is important, but positivity, enthusiasm, these sort of characteristics through thick and thin makes a jolly good officer. And, you know, the same also applies to perhaps to slightly lesser extent to staff. They don't often get in a difficult position like officers, but otherwise a lot of it's the same. It's that care about the community and commitment to public service and other people.
Excellent. And Tim, what do you feel is, I suppose, Suffolk's biggest issue relating to crime at the moment? Is it things like county lines? Is it speeding? You know, what do you see as the biggest issue right now in Suffolk relating to crime?
Well, that's a very good question, and I don't know that I could just say one. What I would say is county lines, we are getting on top of it, and I know there's a debate about what we should be doing about drugs and so on. My personal view is I'm not in favour of relaxing the rules, because I've seen what organised crime do. If they don't do that, they'll move on to something else. It is a serious issue, because once people get entrapped in county lines and then in the gang culture, there are some shocking, terrible stories, and trying to get people out of that is a challenge. I think the attitude towards women at the moment, the vast majority of people are very well behaved, but you may have heard of that awful assault over at Elvedon yesterday, I think it was, when this woman was out running and got attacked. There is too much of this. There's too much violence in society. I think that's an issue. I don't want to portray the fact and make it seem that Suffolk is a very violent county, because it's not. When things like this happen, we are shocked because it's unusual. I suspect if you're in the middle of London, you wouldn't turn, you know, they probably wouldn't even get reported, because sadly it's too common there. So those are two very, very big things. And I think the other issue, I am concerned about the level. I suppose domestic abuse and violence, we've done a huge amount on that. It's never enough. That's a big, big issue, partly because when children are brought up in a very violent situation, we do know they're highly likely to be the perpetrators when they're older. And that's not their fault. It's because somehow as a society, we've not been able to deal with this and say this is the way to behave. So I think those are the two big issues. Underneath that, I get loads and loads of comments, there's too much speeding everywhere and bad driving. And that is serious. So we have to do a lot of enforcement on that. Again, that's never enough. Then we've got the challenge out in rural areas where we've got big community, big area, open areas, a lot of isolation. So that's a challenge as well. But everything else, and I mentioned earlier, the online threat, I think that's going to become even bigger. And of course, that's what we call the hidden harm, because you don't see it. And if I could just give you one other anecdote, the survey we're doing on our police and crime plan at the moment, we've had a lot of responses, and everybody, or the vast majority of people, want more visibility, i.e. seeing officers in uniforms. And we've got a challenge there. That's another big issue, to say that just by having an officer in a uniform on the street corner isn't in itself going to prevent crime. Clearly it's about reassurance and helping, but so many crimes now are done behind closed doors or online. Well, you're an officer on a street corner going to make a damn bit of difference to that. So we've got a communication issue to get the balance right on all that. So you name it, it's in there.
Lot going on. Now, one final question, just leave on a positive note. You know, if you've got a young person out of school and they're thinking, watching this, and they're thinking, right, you know, I want to join the police. What's your best piece of advice for them?
Have a look at the Constabulary website. There's a lot of information there on all the details that are required. It will give a description of all the variations. As a police officer, I think you potentially have got an excellent career. I talked about the salaries. I know it's not just about the money, the pound notes or whatever you like to call it. If you think a chief constable, for example, in Suffolk, which is one of the smaller forces, his salary up to 155, 160,000. And on the way to progress up to a senior officer, there are so many different parts of policing. We're really short of detectives at the moment. And that's not just about going out to visit a crime scene. There's online detection and so on. There's roads policing. There's the dog unit. There's the specialist investigation teams. There's the organised crime team. You may have heard recently about the Kestrel team, which are forces of 7 officers called in at a short notice to deal with antisocial behaviour or neighbourhood disputes. Last year, we launched the Sentinel teams. They've got a lot of the automatic number plate recognition kit, tasers, firearms is another department. So there's such a broad range of officers there, as well as your normal on the patrol, on the beat, community policing. And I'd be very surprised if you're interested in keeping people safe, reducing crime and preventing crime. But you can bet your bottom dollar there is a place for you in Suffolk Constabulary. Good
stuff. What way to end. Tim, thank you so much for joining us on Careers and Coffee.
It's been an absolute pleasure and lovely to see you all. Thank you.
So, folks, that was Tim Passmore, Police and Crime Commissioner at Suffolk Constabulary. Just what a fantastic insight into all the brilliant work that Suffolk Police are doing, and also roots into it, not necessarily as a police officer, but so many different roles as a part of that. So, folks, that wraps up this week's Careers and Coffee. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday and Thursday for more brilliant guests. Thank you.